Okay, our next speaker is Norm Haley, a student here at Auburn University in the Fisheries Department. He's going to talk to us about small impoundments in Central Alabama, survey and evaluation of management techniques and enhancements.
Thank you, Damon. So we know that sport fishing and recreational fishing is a popular pastime in the Southeast, and Alabama is really no exception to that. And it's even to the point that anglers have become willing to pay for exceptional fishing experiences. There's evidence of this throughout the state with anglers leasing properties and also paying at sport fishing resorts and things like that for exceptional fishing experiences. And this study today focuses on the pond use and the management techniques and enhancements that owners throughout Central Alabama are using to provide some of these exceptional fishing opportunities for themselves and for others. And we hope in the end that some of this information that we find from this study can go on to help spur some interest in the development of pay-to-fish properties and maybe even supplement the economy of this Black Belt region. So here we have the Alabama Black Belt, which is here on the state map by the counties outlined in gray there, shaded in gray. There's 17 of them, and they're characterized by their fertile prairie soils and meager economy. Small impoundments in the state are very numerous, and they do serve multiple uses. And Alabama anglers are also quite numerous, and they provide quite a bit of economic output. And with a lot of angling taking place in small impoundments, there have been many techniques and enhancements developed to provide some better fishing. So for basic pond management techniques, for pond management techniques, there are basic techniques, and there's also what we tend to term as enhancements. Your basic techniques are fertilization, liming, and balanced harvest, along with weed control, and enhancements being pellet feeding, supplemental forage, stocking supplemental forage, stocking select genetic strains, and also harvesting to extremes. And in these, what we consider exceptional ponds are those that can provide trophy fish, enhanced catch rates, or even better than that, instances of both of those. And those are generally what we see our pay-to-fish and leased properties and sport fishing resorts striving for. So for the rest of the talk, I'll be touching on the objectives of the study, also going over some methods and results for a pond owner survey and field assessment that we conducted, and then I'll wrap up with some conclusions and future work. So the objectives for the study are twofold. The objectives I'll be going over today are twofold. The first is a survey of private Alabama pond owners, and then secondly, we'll be looking at a field assessment of the most commonly applied pond enhancements. So the study region here consists of those 17 Black Belt counties, but we also added 6 others. You can see here in the red shade, simply to expand coverage, and also because the economy of those counties also closely resembles that of the Black Belt. In each of the counties, we randomly selected 12 ponds. Looking at map sources, we gathered owner information at the county courthouses, and then we contacted those owners by telephone. To date, we've contacted 172 of the 276 pond owners. We've completed 131 surveys. 33 of the ponds were no longer could not be surveyed for the fact that they maybe no longer existed or had changed property ownership or things along those lines. And we had only 8 folks actually refuse the survey. So for use, although the ponds, again, do provide a multitude of uses here, we find that recreational fishing is by far the most commonly reported use for these ponds. Also interesting to note is just how few folks are using their properties as a source of income as pay-to-fish properties. For species stocked, we find that largemouth bass and brim as a group here and catfish are the 3 most commonly stocked species. And that threadfin shad used as forage come out here fairly low. For a management strategy, we find that the overall, the majority of our pond owners strive for general balance in their ponds. We did have quite a few folks that stated that they had no management goal for their ponds, and the overall 76% of the pond owners claimed that they were happy or satisfied with the condition of their pond. Some of the problems that the owners did mention were slow bass growth and slow brim growth. Problems with aquatic weeds or algae, though, did come up in the survey. For the pond management information sources, we find that friends and family come out on top, unfortunately. and that regional and extension information comes out at the top of the list, and that there are folks out there that are managing ponds that don't really use any information. Also surprising was that just how few folks were using the internet websites for any type of pond management information. For the techniques and enhancements, we found that 48% of the pond owners fertilized their ponds, 37% of them applied supplemental pellet feed, and that 13% of them stocked supplemental forage. And of that 13% that stocked the supplemental forage, 45% of them were stocking threadfin shad. For some additional results here, we found that about half the pond owners have never had their ponds checked for balance or water quality, and that 93% of them do not keep harvest records. So although 76% of these pond owners were very happy with the condition of their pond, a lot of that was based off perception and guessing, really, because they've never had it evaluated otherwise. So that moves on to our second objective of going in the field and assessing these commonly applied enhancements, which came from the reports of pond owners, again, that being stocking threadfin shad and applying pellet feed. So for our methods for the assessment, we looked at, we selected 5 to 10 ponds based on minimum qualifications that it had to be stocked for at least 5 years. It had to range from 2 to 16 hectares or 5 to 50 acres, and it had to contain largemouth bass and brim. We classified the ponds by 5 management strategies. The first being unmanaged, the second being fertilized. Another category was fertilized and feeder, or pellet fed, and we considered a pond to be pellet fed if it had at least 1 pellet feeder for every 2 to 4 hectares or 5 to 10 acres. We also categorized one being fertilized and having stocked threadfin shad, and then lastly fertilized, having stocked threadfin shad and applying pellet feed. In the field, we conducted 3 15-minute electrofishing transects at each pond. We also hauled seines 4 times at Quadrat. We collected primary production information by chlorophyll A and zooplankton samples. And our abiotic collections consisted of alkalinity and hardness, Secchi transparency, turbidity, and also temperature and dissolved oxygen profiles. And pending owner permission, we were able to bring back largemouth bass from most every site that we visited for an age and growth analysis. We kept those fish in 10 millimeter groups from 100 to 350 millimeters. We couldn't really keep fish beyond that 350 millimeters because folks just really weren't too happy seeing their larger fish come home to be assessed later on in the lab, so we had to release those on site. Of the fish that we were able to collect, though, we removed their sagittal otoliths and aged those. We took focus to annuli measurements, and we conducted back calculations for fish up to age 3. And in the field, we saw quite a wide array of variation here of pond types. We found those from trophy bass to trophy brim situations, those that contain many undesirable or competing species, even a few brim-crowded situations, but by far the most common situation we saw was of a largemouth bass crowding. We decided to look at PSDs to assess the balance on these management types, and we found that the PSD simply didn't accurately convey largemouth bass population states, that they provided a general overestimation of the population state of largemouth bass in the pond, and that was simply due to the fact that the quality length of 300 millimeters is simply just too small to predict bass crowded systems. Better off, we found that RSD-P, using the preferred length of 380 millimeters or 15 inches, to be a better predictor of largemouth bass population state. And this slide here is an example of a stock density indices plot and the information that it can provide. Those points falling out, we have bluegill PSD here on the x-axis and largemouth bass RSD-P on the y. And points falling out on the graph are indicative of the population state in the pond. Those in the middle being balanced. Upper left here, brim crowded. Lower right, bass crowded. Transition trophy states in the top right, and a multitude of problems here in the bottom left, ranging from low fertility, competing species, or foraging difficulties. And when we look at a plot of just the mean stock indices by management type, we see that for the most part, it really doesn't matter what management type you apply to a pond, that it's going to come out in a balanced state, a generally balanced state. But there's a lot of variation within these means that we can explore to get more information on the balance or population states that these management techniques can provide. So here's the plot of the unmanaged stock indices for each site that we went to. And when we see a general trend of low largemouth bass RSD-Ps here for many of the sites, and a wide range of bluegill PSDs here for these unmanaged sites, and many falling out in a bass crowded or both low bluegill PST or mediocre bluegill PSDs and low largemouth bass RSD-Ps. Moving on to the fertilized management strategy, we see again very similar, a wide range of bluegill PSDs, and we're still looking at pretty low largemouth bass RSD-Ps. And with fertilized and feeder, we see some clumping here of some bluegill moving up the PSDs, moving with some greater PSDs here. But again, we're still looking at low bass, but there is some variation with some points falling out up into the balanced category. Now we move on to fertilized and shad. So now we're looking at ponds that have been stocked with threadfin shad, and all of a sudden we see this jump in largemouth bass RSD-Ps. We see now many up here in the balanced quadrants, even up into the brim crowded or forage crowded situation. But still a wide range of bluegill PSDs, though it may be shifting a little bit lower once shad are in the system. And looking at fertilized shad and feeder management strategies, again very similar to the previous slide with fertilized and shad. We see the increase in largemouth bass RSD-Ps and the range of bluegill PSDs, and it does seem to be a little bit lower on the bluegill PSD. This is the plot of the occurrence of memorable size bluegill within management strategies. Memorable size bluegill is one that's 10 inches, and we see that as management increases, we see a general increase in the proportion of memorable sized bluegill, and that memorable sized bluegills are even occurring at a pretty good proportion when there are shad in the system. Here's the same plot, but for largemouth bass. A memorable size largemouth bass is around 20 inches. And again, same trend as we increase management strategies here, or management techniques, that we see an increase in the proportion of memorable size largemouth bass. So to touch back on some of the results here, we found that bluegill PSD and largemouth bass RSD-P widely varied among management types, and that there was a high frequency of bass crowding in unmanaged fertilized and feeder strategies, and that balanced and bluegill crowded sites were more frequent with the fertilized and fertilized shad and feeder strategies, and that bluegill and largemouth bass RSD-M generally increased with management, and that good proportions of memorable sized bluegill still occurred in ponds that had threadfin shad, and that we do see a higher proportion of memorable sized largemouth bass in ponds that have been stocked with threadfin shad. Here quickly I wanted to touch on some of the age and growth information we're working on. This is still in analysis, but here we have on the x-axis age up to age 3 and length, and we look here as we go up here in age, the points are staying pretty close together here, and there's not many trends falling out. And much like the PSD means, when we come back to look at the variation within management strategy, there's wide variation of length at age, even within a strategy. Up here towards age 3, we're already looking at 125 millimeters difference, depending upon the site. So we're still running through this information and trying to get a grasp on the growth right now. So here's a plot of some graphs of bluegill relative weight by size class. We have management type here on the x-axis with relative weight here on the y. Standard error bars with the lettered groupings resulting from an SNK test. And we see that for those bluegills less than 200 millimeters, we don't really see any general trends despite management strategy. But when we bump up here to look at those that are greater than 200 millimeters, we see a fertilization effect as unmanaged ponds here, those that are not fertilized, fall out with a lower relative weight than the other management strategies, and that also we see really good relative weights in ponds that contain threadfin shad, as opposed to those that don't with the fertilized and feeder strategies. The same style plot here, but now for largemouth bass. For those largemouth bass smaller than 380 millimeters, we do see a fertilizer effect with these younger guys, and that those ponds stocked with shad fall out with a greater mean relative weight than those that were not stocked with shad. and the trends hold somewhat close to those that are over 380 millimeters. Again, seems to be somewhat of a fertilizer effect, and those ponds with shad also tend to fall out at the top there. So now I'll wrap up with some conclusions, and then we'll touch on some future work. We found that the majority of the ponds served as recreational fishing for bass, brim, and catfish, and that general balance was a strong focus among pond owners, and that largemouth harvest appears to be their biggest obstacle. Very few owners were keeping harvest records. And that we found fertilizer, pellet feed, and threadfin shad are the most popular or common enhancements in our survey. For fish growth and conditioning, we found that it varied greatly among and even within the management types, and that in the analysis, RSD-P was more sensitive to the largemouth population state than PSD was. And that we found that owner management goals were rarely attained. I'll go back to that 76% satisfaction rate again with these ponds. Although the owners were perceived happy with their pond and stated they had a goal of general balance, when we got out there in the field, we found that simply wasn't the case. We came across bass-crowded states quite a bit, which was off from the management goal of the owners. For threadfin shad, we found an overall positive effect on largemouth bass stock density and their condition, and that we feel that they may help to prolong or maintain balanced or quality largemouth bass populations. We found that bluegill size was generally reduced with, or bluegill stock densities were generally reduced when shad were present in the systems, but the memorable size fish still did occur. And we also found that supplemental pellet feed was just highly variable. It really limited our ability to assess that management technique. For future work, we're currently continuing the phone survey, and we've expanded it to cover the entire state of Alabama. And we're also contacting some fee fishing operations to look at the uses of their ponds. And I also plan to look at soil characteristics in pond management and see if there's any relation to the fish population states. And I'll do that by looking at calcium carbonates and organic matters. And with that, I'd like to thank my funding agencies, Dr. Michael Allen at the University of Florida for his advising, and all those who have provided technical assistance throughout the project. If I have some time, I'd be glad to take any questions. Sure.
Yeah, your drift and shad, those guys are probably tied to one of the consulting firms, and they're probably, they're like us, they're spending a lot of money to stock drifters. I know they're not cheap as you think. But these landowners that spend that kind of money are also maybe doing more active management, like harvesting and all, because they're obviously attuned to some kind of advanced management. They're getting older quick, I'm sure.
I would definitely agree with that. For the most part, if folks were willing to stock threadfin shad, you're right, they're tied to a consulting agency or hatchery, and they've gotten some good information from those folks. And they're more attuned to what it takes to reach their management goals. They get the bug in the ear about bass harvest and really getting out there and fishing and actually taking care of the pond and being consistent with fertilization and stocking and harvest and all that. So I think I would definitely agree with that for sure.